Regulatory Authority taking the lead in that aspect. Though before the Nuclear Regulatory Authority was established, you have the Ghana Atomic Energy Commission, and you have in the Ghana Atomic Energy Commission, you have what we call the Radiation Protection Institute. And so things which are related to nuclear security and other things were being done by the Radiation Protection Institute. But currently, that activities are being handled by the Nuclear Security Department in the Nuclear Regulatory Authority. So when it comes to concepts of nuclear security, and of which nuclear security culture is a key feature, what we have is that, one, in our regulations, there are aspects that deal with our potential licensee having a nuclear security program as part of their security activities that they perform. They need to have a nuclear security program. And so it's now like an obligation for any authorized person to have that program in place. And so, for instance, if you go to Ghana Atomic Energy Commission, where you have the Ghana Research Reactor 1, they have instituted the nuclear security program for their staff in order for them to be able to institutionalize, the concept of nuclear of culture amongst their staff, because you are dealing with nuclear materials. So, and people can have malicious intent. People can, you can have insiders and all those things. And so, because it is part of our regulations, they have instituted some of these systems in place for them to be able to make their staff aware of how they have to go about when they are dealing with nuclear materials or when they are dealing with natural sources. So in a nutshell, I'll say that yes, in our the only nuclear facility we have practices this kind of culture amongst their staff. And when it comes to the radiological facilities that we have, the hospitals and the industrial applications, they also have some form of culture that they practice in terms of security of the various activities they perform. So that's the little I can say. Most of these organizations have somewhat culture institutionalized in the organizational framework of which each of their staff follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Michael. What about you, Mr. Osune, the Nigerian context?
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So I'll start by actually stating that radioactive material are used in a variety of sectors in Nigeria, right? And the Nigerian Nuclear Regulatory Authority, being the competent authority charged with the responsibility for enhancing safety and security with regards to radioactive material, was established in 2001. It was established by the Act 19 of 1995, and it finally came to operation in 2001. I'm stating this to lay the background to make us know that the use of radioactive material actually predates the establishment of the Nigerian Nuclear Regulatory Authority. So you have the research reactor as the only nuclear facility in Nigeria, the Nigerian research reactor, and then you have some other high-risk radiological facilities. We have the gamma irradiation facility and some other radiological facilities like the radiotherapy facilities, just as my Ghanaian counterpart just mentioned. So as the competent authority charged with the responsibility of ensuring safety and security, protecting life, health, and property from the harmful effects of ionizing radiation, the Nigerian Nuclear Regulatory Authority has been able to institute some regulations stemming from the Act, because the Act has actually given us that power to develop those regulations. And of course, when you have, it's very, it's noteworthy that you laid the foundation for what nuclear security really is. From the definition that you gave, it actually suggests that the regulatory body alone cannot ensure the control of radioactive material. So we do that in conjunction with other stakeholder organizations that have responsibilities when it comes to, with regards radioactive material, the use of radioactive and enforcing nuclear and other radioactive material. So in a nutshell, the nuclear security in Nigeria has come a long way in terms of collaboration with these stakeholders, knowing that the Nigerian Nuclear Regulatory Authority cannot on its own be able to enforce these regulations that have been put in place. Yes, they are the competent authorities, but they work in conjunction with other stakeholder organizations. And a lot have really been put in place. As the discussion unfolds, there will be a lot that will point out as to how Nigeria has actually as in advanced in the nuclear security regime. But majorly, we have a lot of collaboration with the national stakeholders. And when you talk about nuclear security, the importance of training can never be overemphasized. Training and awareness can never be overemphasized. So we do a lot of training, capability development, and others. But for the, like I mentioned, they have just one nuclear facility, which is the research reactor. And some of our regulations have already stated as requirements for the institution of a program that ensures that nuclear security is of high priorities in those facilities. So for now, that's what I would just say about this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Usume. Robert, from your explanation about Africans' approach, what about the UK's approach?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invite. So, United Kingdom. United Kingdom has a very long history in the nuclear industry. And the main driver in the very early days was actually to generate the United Kingdom having an atomic bomb. That has had a whole number of influences across the United Kingdom and the world, but it meant that some of the regulations and some of the acts were more directed towards keeping information secret. So we had the Official Secrets Act, and we've had that since before the First World War, back in 1911 or whatever. But from there, now I'll only be talking about the civil side. I won't be mentioning anything on the military side beyond we went towards the bomb. We have, over the decades, been getting our regulations and that aligned with what is really happening and how the industry grew up. So we've got to recognise that the radioactive materials in hospitals and such like are not covered by the regulator for nuclear. That's covered by our Environment Agency. They don't necessarily have security specialists, so we actually use things like the police to provide advice and guidance to hospitals to actually make sure that their radioactive material in hospitals are secure. A bit of legislation that we had since about 1965, the Health and Safety at Work Act, was directed towards actually improving the workplace and the safety in the workplace. And what happens is that actually started introducing the idea of a safety culture. Now, from that safety culture on safety is everybody's responsibility, we have therefore seen that when we start talking about security culture, we see that security culture is actually everybody's responsibility. And although we don't necessarily see in the international guidance safety and security just being there, security culture, certainly in the United Kingdom, much as we may assess and look at it separately, and we may talk about security culture, and we'll be looking at those points on guidance from the regulator. Security culture is only one part of an organisation culture. Because we've got our safety culture, we've got our organisational culture, and if we actually find that there's starting to be a mismatch between our security culture, our safety culture, and our organisational culture, is what happens is that starts undermining one or the other, or certainly driving it to a different place. And such like. So we've actually seen Health and Safety at Work Act set up our safety. And then we've seen things like the nuclear industry security regulations brought in. Now, the positive thing, I would argue, being a former regulator in a NISR 2003, nuclear industry security regulations came in 2003, is that we in the United Kingdom have an outcomes-based regulatory approach. And we've actually seen that the regulator is then providing outcomes to be achieved. At one point, we used to give advice and guidance on what good would probably look like. But now we're actually seeing that fundamental security principle number 3 in our security assessment principles that come out from a regulator is about security culture. Sorry, or is it number 2? Anyway, you can go up onto the Office for Nuclear Regulations website, download our security assessment principles and see that security culture is there as a challenge. Now, as a duty holder or working for a duty holder, we need to actually address and show the regulator that we are actually addressing their fundamental security principles in the way that we do business. And that requires that we need to actually address the claims, put forward the arguments, and provide evidence that we have put in place a security culture, we're assessing our security culture and pushing it forward. We see that the security culture across the industry, because we've got a number of different duty holders, is similar but not identical or not delivered identically in all duty holders. And nor do they necessarily try to provide the same evidence to underpin their arguments that they are actually addressing security culture. But that's where we have had a moving regulatory environment towards where we are in the current world. We've actually been strengthening our regulations, we've been picking it up, we've been addressing deficiencies in other parts of our legislative position, whether it's through the Crime and Security Act, whether it's through the Energy Act to set up our civil nuclear constabulary and such like. But we have always been conscious of protection of sensitive nuclear information, so it doesn't actually come into the purview of potentially malicious capabilities. And we've also been looking at how we make sure that everybody is protecting material to a proportionate level, rather than everybody having to meet a specific outcome dictated may be quite a strong word, directed by a regulatory position that may not necessarily be the most appropriate for the way they want to operate their facilities. And therefore, admittedly, a long way around, our nuclear industry security regulations just asks the duty holder, among other things, to ensure they have an appropriate, approved nuclear site security plan to actually deliver security of nuclear and radioactive materials and under their control. Does that partially answer the question? Because
Yes, it does, because from your explanation, it shows that your main goal is to ensure that these materials are being kept safely, to ensure that these your staffs or your employees are really aware what they are doing and how they can manage the situations, and also you collaborate with other national stakeholders to ensure that these facilities are being protected from risk or from trade. Moving further, what are the challenges you face with these stakeholders trying to ensure that the nuclear security culture is being maintained and is also being controlled? Over to you, Dr. Michael.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting question. Um, so what I'll say is, like I said, in our nuclear regulatory document in relation to nuclear security, we state that the organizations will integrate nuclear security as part of their overall organizational culture or organizational structure. The difficulty you find is that most of top management think nuclear security culture and related activities are more technical. So, in terms of them prioritizing that uh, in comparison to, the other priorities that they have in terms of, their finances and other things of the organization, they don't see the need for, integrating such kind of cultures among the overall, running of their organization. So that's one of the challenges I see. And another thing is, though our regulatory requirements states that there should be some form of an assessment, of these kind of cultures, so that you'll be able to know whether there are any weaknesses. We've not really gone out there to uh, like request some of these organizations to at least, share some of the gaps that some of the gap they observed when they carried out, an assessment of their nuclear security culture. Another thing is, well, though some organizations are aware, of the need of having nuclear security um, culture as part of the overall culture of the organization, some more, effort needs to be put in place to have a larger group, of these organizations being aware of the need of having this. Because, I mean, security is the responsibility of everybody in the organization. The way we are more concerned about nuclear safety, we have to have those, two cultures working together. So I'll give an example. In the nuclear regulatory document, in the nuclear regulatory authority, we have integrated our safety and security cultures. So we have a policy on nuclear safety and security culture that we intend to drive through the organization for everyone to be aware of the synergies in all these things. So that we'll be able to have people being conscious of the need to ensure the security of the various activities that we perform as a regulatory body. And so therefore, I think that aspect is one of it. Now, we also know that nuclear security is the responsibility of the states. So we would usually request or require some of our intelligence agencies would lead this forth to make it known to more of the policymakers that nuclear security culture is something that we have to drive amongst all the agencies. And so we have a unified document that explains what nuclear security culture is in relation to the activities that they perform as supporting the overall, security of a country. So these are some of the things I see as the challenges. We have to make more people aware of it. We have to carry out some assessment, as a regulatory body or as a nuclear security, uh, what do you call it? Organizations have to carry out an assessment to see whether their staff and their employees really understand these concepts, and at least, share some of these informations to be able to assist other organizations who are yet to implement or integrate nuclear security culture in their overall organizational culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Micah. Before I move to Mr. Osume, I would like to, do you have any case study that you guys have handled, and how was the approach? Do you have anything to say about it, like a case study?
So I know of the Ghana Atomic Energy Commission tried to draft a nuclear security. They have a draft nuclear security culture program, and they've also carried out some awareness amongst their staff, tried to, incorporate it in some of their usual seminars that they organize. And so I know of them carrying out such kind of activity in order to make some of their staff aware about it. But as to whether they themselves or any of the other organizations, Radiological or any other organization, has really gone out there to assess their nuclear security culture, that's I'm not aware of. But that's the only one I know is about the Ghana Atomic Energy Commission trying to incorporate some of these in their usual activities that they perform so that their staff will always be abreast with the culture that nuclear security comes with.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, to Mr. Osume. Nigeria faces complex security issues from terrorism to organized crime. So how does this influence the development of robust nuclear security culture? You're muted, okay.
First of all, you gave the definition of nuclear security culture as the assembly of characteristics, attitude, and behavior of individuals, organizations, and institutions, which have a means of supporting and enhancing nuclear security. This definition is given in the Nuclear Security Series document number 7. And that definition is actually letting us know that when you are talking about nuclear security culture, you are talking about behavioral attitudes of people. So sometimes it's kind of difficult to actually, as in, access and manage when you're talking about behavior and attitude. But when you now talk about the challenges that Nigeria has faced, as in terms of those various challenges, security challenges and all, over time, it has the importance of nuclear security culture has actually been enhanced in Nigeria. Because before now, as in some years back, it was majorly on national security and all, not talking about nuclear security. But at a point, nuclear security was now incorporated into the national security strategy. And that for us was a big plus, because it then took nuclear security to like a national level. It now became a national discourse, whereby you are now knowing that nuclear security, because when you talk about nuclear security culture, you have to first of all be aware that, as in, you have to have that our consciousness that the threat associated with radioactive material is real. That nuclear security threat is real. For a country, if you don't have that awareness, if that buy-in is not there, that the nuclear security threats are real, then you may begin to have problems. So for us, that incorporation of the nuclear security into the national security strategy was a big plus. And it was as a result of the various issues that were coming up, the security challenges, because of course, these security challenges are not peculiar to Nigeria alone. It's a global phenomenon. But when we looked at what was happening in the context of, as in the global context, and also internalized it, looking at the threats posed by radioactive material, the possibility of it being used in RODDs, in nuclear weapons and all that. And so that realization made us we have this nuclear security committee, and it's composed of different stakeholder organizations, the law enforcement, the intelligence, like I said in my earlier submission. the regulatory body would not be the only one to do this. Yes, we have the technical capability, but when you now situate nuclear security in the broader national security context, you then know that you have to involve the other stakeholder organizations. So there have been a lot of involvement in terms of the buy-ins from the law enforcement. Yes, they have their priorities, like Dr. Michael has stated. There are several challenges because many of these these stakeholder organizations, they also have their primary role, their primary responsibility in security. So sometimes it looks like, okay, there's a competing factor when it comes when you are incorporating nuclear security. But where the awareness was built was the area where there was a lot of sensitization, a lot of awareness on what the hazards associated with radioactive materials. So there at that point, that was when we started getting the buy-ins, and of course we had the collaboration of the Office of the National Security Advisor, which is the authority, the national security agency that is in charge of when it comes to national security. Anything national security, the Office of the National Security Advisor is the one that is involved. So we got the buy-in, and that was when we incorporated nuclear security into the national security strategy. And since then, there have been a lot of improvements. We know that nuclear security culture, when you're talking about nuclear security culture, it's not really we can't really say it's a fixed destination. It's not a fixed point. It's a continuous process. So it then suggests that several efforts have to be put in place. It's not like you are saying that, yes, you've actually achieved what you want to do. It's an ongoing process. And so we have a lot of memorandum of understanding amongst agencies. Like, for instance, the Nuclear Regulatory Authority, where I work as a regulator, we have a lot of memorandum of understanding with the Nigerian police, with the customs, with the intelligence organizations. And the essence of that is to build that collaboration, to know that, yes, nuclear security is very important. And one of the advantages of having that MOU was that at the point at the point of recruitment for some of these law enforcement agencies, the point at which they are being recruited in their national training, nuclear security components, some modules of bordering on nuclear security is incorporated into their modules. So it's like a strategy that is trying to make sure that at that recruitment stage, the law enforcement agencies are very much aware of what nuclear security is all about. And over time, we've had a lot of success stories. One that I would point here is that's in the area of customs. Customs is at the borders. There was a situation where there was a particular device that was coming in, and it had the placard of the radioactive material by a particular embassy, which I would not mention here. And at the point where it was coming in, the custom officers had to confiscate and told them, did you get some kind of authorization from the Nigerian Nuclear Regulatory Authority? Because we are the one in charge of issuing licenses and all that. So when it comes to importation or whatever, or the use, storage of radioactive material. So they had to communicate to the Nigerian Nuclear Regulatory Authority, and it was escalated from that point. So that is to tell you, as in the multifaceted approach that is required when it comes to nuclear security. So it is also as a result of the realization of the the evolving threats, like you mentioned, there is certain security challenges and all that. Who says that the people with malicious intent cannot actually incorporate radioactive material? Before now, it was almost seen like an impossibility, but over time, there have been that consciousness among citizens and even as in more so the security officers that this is a real is an existential threat. So these are just kind of the involvement that has happened over time, putting as in with the realization of these challenges, these security challenges that we've been having. So there have been a lot of engagement, more so with the incorporation of the nuclear security in the national security strategy. And that has really given us a edge in terms of discussion amongst ourselves.
Thank you very much, Mr. Osimhen. I love the way you describe it. Firstly, you spoke about the behavioral, like attitude, because every human being has their own personality and their own approach to dealing with situations, either risk or threat. And you spoke about, firstly, it was a national security, but now it's now incorporating every sector of security. You also mentioned about how law enforcement, in terms of their training, they make sure they include national nuclear security culture, and that's the primary way in which you can now really educate these individuals who have limited knowledge on technical issues about nuclear and them to be aware of it. And if you understood about the approach of Mr. Michael, he spoke about law enforcement and the way they approach nuclear security. They think it's very, very complex. But when you're able to implement them, especially in issues of law enforcement, it really helps the citizens and all civilians to be able to understand what's happening. So over to you, Mr. Robert. I will ask you, how does the UK ensure transparency, accountability in nuclear decision making without compromising security? Because I know the UK has long history in terms of nuclear security culture. So what are they doing? How is it being done? You're muted.
I'm unmuted. Thank you very much. Good guidance, Madam Chair. Okay. I suppose in the past, nuclear security culture and a lot of security culture in many organisations was, we in security know best. We won't tell you. We'll just be doing our thing. We won't tell you. And the only time you actually saw the security was when they came out of their office to give you a telling off for something that you did wrong, even though you didn't even know you had done it wrong. So rap across the knuckles or whatever. That's the security culture that still exists in places where we have Big Brother knows best and we will come down on you if you get it wrong. Some people view that security culture is just basically guns, guards and fences or delay. But security culture requires this transparency. And one of the first things we need to have people understand is that a threat exists or could exist against our specific facilities. I was speaking at a safety conference. I was only security speaker there. And my first question to this room was, and they were all from nuclear safety, is who thinks a threat exists? And the number of hands that went up were less than 50%, which was really disappointing that these were people that were working in the nuclear industry and supposed to be applying a good security culture. And as we see from, thank you very much, Nuclear Security Series number 7, one of the underpinning fundamentals is a threat exists. So one of the first challenges is getting people to understand a threat exists. We don't need to tell them what that threat will possibly look like. We've got our design basis threat. Most states have their own. But we can at least give people guidance about some of the things that we may be subject to here. We may be subject to terrorist threat. We may be subject to large vehicle-borne improvised devices. We may be subject to lone wolf. We may be subject to insider threat. It doesn't necessarily mean that we will be, but we need to be making people aware that they need to be conscious so that they can actually make observations about, I find it strange that this person doesn't like to come and have lunch with the rest of us because he likes to stay in the file room or in the lab or wherever, depending on which part of the industry you're working in. We also need to have an understanding that culture involves everybody, but it's certainly driven by the top. And if we actually have a senior management or a part of the senior hierarchy that takes a do as I say, not as I do, a them and us type culture, that will actually destroy almost everything we work for lower down. Because if we see that senior managers are not going to be subject to search, we will challenge why we're being subject to search. If we see them that they're actually allowed to do certain actions or take their computers abroad, whereas we're not, we may possibly just take our computers abroad because it's all right, the senior managers do it. So we actually see this needing to acknowledge a threat exists, having to make sure people have an understanding of what those threats may be, not the specifics, but what they could be like. That senior management, as well as everybody else, follows it and does the correct actions. But another part that potentially underpins, and I'll give you a case study. Many years ago, a reporter managed to get themselves onto a nuclear power station to be a fire watcher. Now, a fire watcher is when there's work like welding or that going on, you need to have somebody there that will check that we won't actually inadvertently set fire to part of our plant. This was during a nuclear power plant outage. But that person was a reporter. They were using their cameras, they were taking photographs, they were not even doing their job, they were going elsewhere unescorted. And then it became a report. We had a number of organisations that suddenly went back through all their vetting files to check the quality of the work they had done, to check that they had been following up correctly on references, that they had, say, places that were actually understood, so that they actually became confident that they didn't potentially have undercover reporters inside their organisations. So we actually see a number of things. We need to acknowledge that there's a threat there. We need to, some of the organisations need to understand that reputational damage will do as much for them as actually losing nuclear material. The consequences will be different, but at the end of the day, it will actually cause them problems. It will cost them money from doing the job properly. So as part of that transparency is, and when I was working in the regulatory generic design assessment, I wrote a report on the security of 2 reactor designs. I said what good practices I was following. I was putting forward the types of challenges I was giving the regulators, the companies that were putting forward the reactor designs, but I didn't actually say what the secret information was that I'd been provided with. I didn't tell them where the potential vulnerabilities that we may have possibly have found were. I was showing the processes and procedures and such like. That was able to go into the public domain so that the public actually had an understanding that security was being as thorough as our safety colleagues who were going through similar processes to actually make sure it is. So we can actually improve transparency by just being upfront, saying what we're doing, some of the things that we're actually having to consider, this is why it's important, and we're actually working as a team. We're following good relevant practice, we're addressing learning from experience. We can bring all that together without necessarily saying, at my site, I have this challenge and this is how I'm addressing it. But what happens is we can actually give the public that understanding, and it's actually just being open and sharing. And we need to understand that we often talk in security about the need to know. But we also need to understand that we also have a need to share and we have a need to inform. And by making sure we actually meet those points appropriately, we can have the right people doing the right things to the standards that they need to do, and it actually drives up the culture all round. So in many ways, what happens is we're seeing that our head of regulatory organisation does their annual report. It talks about how the regulator has been regulating, the issues they've been looking at, the challenges they've been putting onto the duty holders. But it doesn't actually say what the problems were they found specifically, unless it's something that can actually be shared in the public domain. So actually showing that regulators are proactive, regulators are willing to share what they've been doing and why they're actually adding value. The duty holders talking about and sharing with their staff and contractors what it is they're doing, why they're doing it, and what value it is to them and the contractors, all actually adds up to a strengthening culture for the industry and for the organisation. I hope that's been of some assistance.
Yes, it is. You spoke about to share, to inform, and to coordinate. That means with regards to the transparency, accountability in the nuclear security culture, everybody is responsible. Everybody has to be aware of their role and they have to share information. Really importance goes now to the regulators for them to be able to let the people know about the laws and the policies that they should implement in their security systems.
And I'll pick up on something that, thank you. I'll pick up on something that Asumi said earlier. It's all about attitudes, values, and behaviours. And what happens is, if we see values and behaviours that don't align with either the organisation or what we're trying to do as an industry and such like, we need to actually be brave enough to call them out. Because if we don't, that actually can cause even more problems further down the line. And it's all part of the culture. If we see something on a safety perspective, somebody's not wearing their hard hat or the rear defenders or the safety glasses or their high-vis jacket, we've got no problem at all calling that out. But what we might not do is call out somebody that is appearing to not be following the rules. We won't necessarily call out some people that may be acting fractionally differently or suspiciously, because we may be wrong and we don't want to upset them. But once again, there are things that are going on that in retrospect, it was quite clear something was not right, but nobody had called it out so that we could actually address it early and appropriately.
All right, thank you very much for that addition. So my next question will go to Dr. Michael. How effective are international instruments in shaping your national approach? These instruments are the IEA guideline, the CPNN, the UNSCR 1540.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I mean, Ghana is a party to most of these nuclear security legal framework, and I mean, it's very important that when you're a party to this, you domesticate or you internalize some of these obligations as a country, and so therefore, most of our activities which are related to nuclear security, which has international obligations, have been incorporated in our draft nuclear security regulations. Now, most of the regulations that we use for in developing most of the regulations that we develop in the regulatory body, we rely mostly on the IEA documents, the IEA guides, the nuclear security series. And so it's something that is very important for every country that is willing to go this path, because most of these documents are consensus ideas which are brought together, which could be of benefit to every country that goes through it. Now, another example is, Ghana has, what do you call it? Ghana held an IPAS in 2006, and it's one of the ways that you want to assess to see whether most of these obligations that you have signed to, you are implementing it in your country. And we intend to have an IPAS next year, 2026, to be able to assess some of our physical protection infrastructure we have to see whether at least we are being adherent to some of these provisions in the legal framework. Now, another thing is most of these documents provide some guidelines and some guidance onto how you should carry out some of nuclear security activities. An example is the IE has a very good document on nuclear security. It also has another good document on how to carry out an assessment of nuclear security culture, in any organizations. So such documents could be used by our stakeholders, even for the regulatory body. We can use that document to assess to see how effective our nuclear security culture is, or how our management system or organizational structure or our organizational culture has been, whether it's been effective. And so some of these international instruments that you mentioned is very good for every country to sign on to them, and particularly integrate them into their national legislative framework or their regulatory framework, so as potential licensees or authorized persons will see the need of having to incorporate these in their activities that they perform using nuclear, or radioactive sources.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Osume, what are the legal frameworks or regulatory systems that are in place in your country to guide the nuclear security culture? You're muted.
Yeah. Okay. You said the legal frameworks are in place. Okay. So just following from your previous question on the international instruments, we have like I explained, the acts establishing the Nigerian Nuclear Regulatory Authority. And from the act, we are empowered to develop regulations. So our regulations, the development of our regulations, most of them stem from the international instruments that Nigeria is party to. Some of the legal binding instruments and the non-legal binding instruments. For instance, the CPPNM and its amendments, the Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and its amendments. We actually developed our regulation, our Nigerian Physical Protection of Nuclear Material and Facilities Regulation, which was gazetted in 2021. And many of the requirements from these regulations were developed having to actually align with these international instruments, especially the CPPNM and its amendments. And in that document, in our regulation, we have specific requirements that talks about the implementation of a trustworthiness program. And this trustworthiness program, you remember when Roger was talking about the staff that was recruited into a facility and was actually a reporter. So the trustworthiness program would serve to kind of avert such, because there ought to have been some kind of checks, trustworthiness check on the person before recruitment. So the requirement in our regulation that talks about the need for a trustworthiness program is clearly stated. And when we go for our oversight functions, we ensure that they are actually following that, implementing the requirements of those regulations. And to this effect, the Nigerian Research Reactor that's the Nigerian Research Reactor NEO1, the only nuclear facility in Nigeria, has a human reliability program in place. And that was constituted to satisfy the requirements of our regulations that talked about the need for a trustworthiness program. So also we have this our regulation on safety and security of radioactive sources, regulation which was gazetted in 2006, but is currently being reviewed to the safety and security of radioactive material in use and storage. We are taking out the transport components of that regulation so as to have a standalone document that talks about transport. Then we have just this regulation that talks about material in use and storage. And why it's being reviewed is because we have to, as a result of international best practice and the international instruments that have been signed and ratified. Like, for instance, we supported the supplementary guidance on the management of disused sealed radioactive sources. And to that effect, the international partners, especially the IEA, has assisted us far back in 2007 in repatriating some of these disused sources. And that is kind of showing a chronology on how Nigeria is actually trying to ensure that when it comes to nuclear security, the materials that could actually pose a threat are actually not in the country, are repatriated out of the country. So many of these regulations has actually assisted in a very big way in making sure that several of these activities are carried out by the facilities which we regulate. And then we also supported the guidance on the import and export, supplementary guidance on import and export control. And that part is also contained in our regulation. So that is just how we have tried to domesticate the requirements that are contained in these instruments that we are party to.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you very much. I like the word domesticate these practices, because it's good that we really try to implement these practices in our facilities, also in various areas in our nation. Because when we implement this institutional legal framework, civilians or the non-nuclear experts, the non-nuclear people, they're able to see the relevance and the importance of this legal framework in their practices. So my next question goes to Robert. How does your country address insider threat, illicit trafficking, and cyber-related risk in nuclear domain or nuclear security culture?
Okay. I cannot talk about specifics at any facility, but certainly addressing the insider threat is multi-layered.
Okay.
We start off, as we just heard Usumi say, we start off with our vetting. We try to basically keep or identify at an early point potential malicious threats, and therefore we will try to keep them out. We don't want them joining our organisation, we don't want them coming into our facility, and we certainly don't want them going anywhere near our high value assets. As well as doing the vetting, that's all right today, and it should be all right tomorrow. But what happens is a bit further down the line, things may change in people's lives. People may find that they are either being put under threat, challenge, finding that they would like to make a little bit more money, whatever. We can look at all those case studies. We understand insiders tend to go for mice, money, ideology, coercion or compromise, and ego. But what happens is we follow that up with what we call aftercare. Now, depending on whether you've got a high security clearance or a lower security clearance, it will depend on whether we'll actually do a 6-monthly follow-up questionnaire or whether we'll do a 12-month follow-up questionnaire, just so that we can actually check and feel that what happens is the vetting is still appropriate. Because 3, 4, 5 years down the line, that may actually be not representative of what you as a person really are like anymore. So we've actually got vetting and aftercare. We've got our security culture, values and behaviours. We have our processes and procedures though, where we have higher value assets, where we have things that are potentially known as vital areas, where sabotage could potentially cause quite unacceptable radiological consequences. We will actually be expecting things like the 2-person rule to be applied. We will be doing search coming into areas to check that you're not actually introducing any what I would call contraband, but anything that should not actually be going in there. That we're not actually taking in materials that we shouldn't. We're not actually introducing explosives or whatever. So we've actually got multi-level layers. We also may have put into those areas, I'll call it discrete rather than covert, video surveillance systems so that other people can actually see outside. We will have put into processes and procedures that I may want to go into an area, but Michael has to confirm that it's all right for me to go into the area. We soon will actually need to inform the security staff that I have the authority to go into that area before I actually get it in. So we've actually got checks and balances and processes to try to ensure. And even then, I will probably not be allowed to go into that area by myself. I would actually need to be accompanied by someone else, the 2-person rule, who is aware of what good looks like and what would be non-authorized activities. Because there's no point in someone coming into the area and I'm pulling out switches and I'm adjusting cables when all they're doing is standing there and going, well, there's 2 of us in this room, that's all right.
Yeah.
Rather than going, Robert, what are you doing? So we've actually got processes and procedures, we've got multi-layers, we've got different approaches, we're looking at personnel, we may be looking at assessment technologies, we may possibly have detection technologies. We will be potentially introducing an armed response force into the local area while an area is actually opened up to allow work to be undertaken, so that that isn't potentially compromised. We also need to have checks and follow-ups in that do we actually check that all the alarm systems are actually working in all our emergency exits? Because nobody ever uses emergency exit in an emergency, and we hope we never need one. But is it working? Is it still functioning? Will it do what we need to do? I won't say where I was, but as a site inspector at a nuclear site when I worked for the regulator, we went into a plant, we went and checked all the doors worked. We had informed the control room that we were going to do this task and got to the end and said, so did all the alarms work? And they went, oh no, I just isolate that whole building while you do this check. I thought you were just checking that the door's open. And therefore, we were actually finding that this had been the working process, that someone had forgotten what the real process purpose was and took on their own view.
Yeah.
And therefore, as a regulator, I was not particularly happy, let's just say, and wrote up and observed that what happens is there seemed to be a failure between the process that was being followed and actually what the purpose seemed to be.
Yeah.
So we need to continually make sure. But we also have, and we've spoken about values, behaviours and attitudes, but we also have whistleblowing, where we have an independent route that if I have concern about someone, I don't necessarily need to raise it into my line management system. I don't need to raise it into the organisation. We can put it out so that it will actually come in externally as a challenge to maybe look at somebody's vetting or what's going on. We have the regulator that will come in and have a look at what our process is and observe the procedure in action. And once again, as a regulator, I have gone to see a number of procedures in action. And when it's not actually delivering what it's supposed to be delivering, we would actually go and speak and work out what it is and how we can actually change sometimes very complex processes and procedures into a number of images that can actually be used as pre-job briefs. Remind everybody how it is and what it is and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And then we'll also have inside our own organisation, we'll have our assessment capability that will be working out what needs to be done and why and all the purposes. We'll have our assurance capability that will be going and checking that it's happening on a day-to-day basis, either prearranged or random. And then we'll have independent assurance, which is another part, and not part of the delivery on our facilities. We'll be going in and having a look at processes, procedures, is evidence being gathered, is everything correct? So to address insider threats, we have multiple approaches. Some of it uses technology, some of it uses processes and procedures, some of it actually use personnel security approaches. It's the only way we can deal with one of the most challenging issues, because an insider by its very nature has now got through at least some of the original layers and been given that authority to access areas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robert, on your explanation about basically on insider threat, because it's an issue that affects everyone, even if it's not a nuclear facility, but it affects every institutions and every policy. So with your explanations, I would say that with Africans or with individuals really have to put our insider threat in different layers, other in and the risk blurring, the assessment, the assurance, and the independent approach. We are almost coming to the end of our program. I think we're still like 5 minutes late. So the last question that I have, or like two last questions I have, is what lessons? Oh no, how can democratic institutions like parliament, civil society, media, academia be better engaged in supporting a culture of nuclear security? Should I no, Mr. Michael, can you just answer it?
Well, I mean,
Michael?
it's great. So for Parliament, for instance, in Ghana, the Parliament is supposed to make sure that our regulations are passed. Parliament is supposed to make sure that budget allocations to various organizations receive are passed. And they provide oversight in terms of how the governance of the country goes. So Parliament has a great role when it comes to research institutions. In Ghana we have the Ghana nuclear and allied science, school that we have. So we could have research topics that deal with nuclear security culture, who as potential students can use as projects. We can they can go to some of the facilities that we have and try and assess, some of the nuclear security activities they perform, and also perform an assessment of their nuclear security culture. So it could be part of, their project work, or part of a course that is being run, for organizations to come and study. If you have management or top leadership buy into the need to have nuclear security culture in your organization, you could have an awareness training in that sense. Now, for civil society, they can lead a charge and create the awareness that all these organizations that have nuclear materials, biological materials, have to institutionalize their culture or organizational culture to make sure that the materials that they have in their custody doesn't get into the hand of wrong people. So that there will be less, malicious intent, for people to have access to that material. And so various organizations can have a particular role to enhance, nuclear security culture amongst the various stakeholders that we have.
Yeah, thank you very much. Research really plays a vital role, especially in Africa, because we are still growing the nuclear field. So, if students are able to have the opportunity to invest in research, that will be good. If national institutions are able to invest in research in nuclear issues, it will be very important. So, Ms. Elsume, I have this question. It's not a political question, but would you say politics influence democratic leadership in Africa in regards to nuclear security culture? You're muted.
Sorry, come again with your question.
It's not a political question, but rather I want to get your own point of view. Would you
Okay.
say politics influences democratic leadership in Africa regards to nuclear security culture?
Okay.
You're muted.
Sorry. It's a bit related to the question you asked Dr. Michael, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So once, like for instance, now the parliament, you know, when you go seeking for like going to pass like a budget for carrying out your functions, sometimes they are not aware of what nuclear security culture entails. They are more in tune with passing budgets, infrastructure, and all that. I guess this is not peculiar to Nigeria alone. So there was a strategy that we adopted in Nigeria whereby we tried to, as part of the integrated nuclear security sustainability plan of the IAEA, we incorporated the need to carry out awareness for the high government officials, the people that like for instance, the people in the parliament, the senior government officials that would actually have a role when it comes to passing of the budget. And what we did, the strategy we adopted, because we actually saw it as a challenge. It was a challenge that we actually were witnessing. We now had to, with the assistance of the International Atomic Energy Agency, organized, I think, a 2-day training or thereabouts in the agency, where they were exposed to what nuclear security is all about. Because when you go to the parliament and you go defending budgets, it's more more about other things like national security would actually carry more importance to them, in quotes, to nuclear security. Because when you talk about nuclear security, there aren't so many documented evidence of incidents related to nuclear security events. So sometimes it's actually very difficult to pass across the message. So the awareness is very important. And that was why we adopted that approach of taking them, and the positive from that singular engagement was that when we went in defense of a particular project related to our oversight and all, there was a contribution from one of their colleagues and was like, oh, what is nuclear security? And it was someone else from the parliament that was now answering on our behalf and was like educating his colleague, telling him that, oh, nuclear security is very important and all that. So that is just the strategy that we adopted when it comes to parliament, because with regards to parliament, it could be challenging. And that's why I was smiling when you asked the question, because it's quite difficult when you try to juxtapose the parliament and regulatory infrastructure.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Osume. It's very important really engage these parliamentarians in the nuclear security culture because it affects them directly and indirectly. And if they're not aware of what's happening, they're not able to put this in their regulations or in their laws that, okay, we have to support this, we have to put budget for this amount of it. So, Mr. Richard, I have the last question. Sorry, Robert. For you. How can international partners such as the UK support African states in advancing both nuclear security and democratic governance?
I am not going to say how we should teach anybody to do democratic government, because we even in the United Kingdom have a first past the post process that people think should be changed to proportional representation or whatever. But no, taking that on, a couple of things that came up earlier and I thought was really interesting from my other speakers is we're seeing the 5E approach. Educate why or what, enable how, shaping the environment, encouraging the action and evaluating the impact. 5Es. That's actually appropriate for culture, security culture, but also for driving democratic discussion and such like. Because when we educate why and what, people get a better understanding, people can put forward different views, we can actually get a consensus that actually brings us there. As the United Kingdom, we have lots of experience across the whole nuclear fuel cycle, from power generation to decommissioning to fuel fabrication to working on research reactors and looking at new types of fuel. And we also, in the United Kingdom, are willing to learn internationally on what approaches other people are having. Do they have a better way to look at the issues and such like? And actually, with issues like this, just us sharing different perspectives and different views and different backgrounds actually allows us to take things away and to think about it and how we can apply that in our area. I'm more than happy to come and actually be a speaker on training courses talking about security culture or some of my other specialist areas. We will, however, certainly myself and my colleagues would recognize that we don't know everything. We would need to actually have a good understanding of the cultural issues on what influences people moving forward to the place that we want us all to get to, which is a resilient industry, a secure industry, a safe industry, and that industry actually helping people either through power generation, through health and medicine, through improved agriculture, or whatever. We have experience that we can share. We can have skills and knowledge that would allow countries and organizations to progress probably faster and quicker to where they want to get. But we also need to acknowledge that what happens is we need to work in concert and understand the cultural issues in each location. Because even when working in the United Kingdom, I need to do some stakeholder management in organizations that have been in the industry for a long time, but have a different perspective or have a different priority on certain security issues or how they would like to see it done. But one of the things we need to be open to is new ideas, different approaches, and not come along with, this is the way we've done it, we're good at this is the way you should do it, but rather, this is what we're doing, what are you doing? Excellent. Can I plagiarize, steal, borrow with pride, whatever, your approach, and amend it into my approach so that we actually get to an even better position than we would have individually. We in the United Kingdom support the agency through providing funding. We are available to support organisations through international projects or direct approaches to the organisations. And some of our organisations, being commercial entities or government owned, won't necessarily be able to provide the resources there, but we do have access in the United Kingdom to a large technical support supply chain who have experience to actually help us get to where we want to be. I've done peer reviews for companies on their work, for example, to share international and organisational experiences to help improve their processes, procedures, or methodologies that they're doing. So I don't have a pot of money that I can come and work for anybody, but we do have experience and knowledge that we're actually more than happy to share on webinars like this, or one-to-one calls or whatever, to just discuss through points. And also, and another point it's really interesting to consider is the agency run a number of coordinated research programs, and some of those are in the areas of nuclear security. And what happens is organizations can put forward proposals about what they want to look at, and for some countries and organizations, the agency will provide the funding for you to do the work and attend the meetings. So once again, the UK, part of the international organisation, can share our knowledge and experience in that through sometimes like coordinated research programmes, in papers that we write for international conferences. And I love to go to places like Icons to listen to all the great work that's going on, and then look at my day book that's almost full at the end of the conference, downloading the papers and sharing it with my colleagues so that we can actually improve our processes and procedures as well. we may be a mature industry, but we can also learn stuff from other countries as well as actually share what we've learned with those.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robert, for your explanations. Now goes now to our participants. Do you have any questions before we run up our webinar? You have any questions? So I think everyone is good. Everyone understood what you've explained. Thank you very, very much to Dr. Michael, Mr. Osume, and Mr. Robert. It was really an honor to have you on board to discuss about nuclear security culture and democratic leadership in Africa. From your explanations, I want to just stay here and just keep explaining, but I think we just have to end the webinar today. It was really an interesting one. It was really an interesting one because we learned a lot. Personally, I've learned a lot with regards to the nuclear UK's approach, Nigeria's approach, and Ghana's approach. No matter the different countries we are, but we belong to one continent. And what happens in Nigeria can happen in Ghana and also happen in the UK. As Robert earlier mentioned, it's not about knowing everything. It's about bringing in new ideas and bringing in new approaches on how to resolve these issues. And I asked Mr. Sume concerning politics. He said, of course it is, because we need politicians, we need regulators to really help us to support this nuclear security, especially in Africa. So we need resources and we need regulations that are able to guide us and protect us. With regards to what I mentioned, Mr. Dr. Michael mentioned about the technical gap, that we have to create more awareness about nuclear security. The more people are aware, the more we implement these policies in our various activities, the more we Africans are more comfortable with the word nuclear. I would say when I heard the word nuclear the first time, all I think about was war, fighting. But the more I understood about nuclear, I said, no, there's more to the nuclear, because Robert mentioned about the military approach and the civil approach, okay? So we're talking about the civil approach, and we are all civilians, and we have our own understanding about nuclear. When we go on to the military approach of nuclear, it has different understanding, but we all are particular, we all are peace agents, because we want our society to be peaceful, we want to live happily, and we want to ensure that our well-being is really, really making us protect our generation coming behind. So thank you very much to everyone who participated, and hopefully to see you guys soon. So if you're interested to be part of Wem'Afrika's team, either an expert or to be as a volunteer, you can reach out to me, or you can send us an email at wemafrika1@gmail.com. So thank you very much, and you will have us a lovely evening. But before I leave you, Dr. Osime, can you give us a final word? You're muted.
No, I think someone, I don't know, maybe you check from your side, someone seemed to be raising up their hands. I don't know if I.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Did you see any?
I think it was someone actually doing the little hand claps to thank Madam Chair for her keeping the three specialists in line and on track.
I think so.
I think a question
just
dropped in.
so
I don't know
okay.
if I can be given a minute to ask, please.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. My question goes to Dr. Michael. I want to know now, where are we as in terms of our preparation towards the nuclear power program? It goes to Dr. Michael, please.
Well, okay, so for the nuclear power, most of the activities that deal with the real projects is handled by the nuclear power Ghana. They are the ones who are doing the real siting activities. For the regulatory side, we have developed most of the relevant regulations that we need for the oversight. And we are expecting that by the end of the year or the beginning of next year, most of these regulations that will guide our activities will be passed by Parliament. And I know that the site for the potential nuclear power plant has been secured, and I know that they are carrying out some of the siting activities just to ensure that it's fit for purpose. I also know that there are some agreements that have been signed with some potential vendors, whether it's for the SMR or for the large reactor type. And all these things are in the, what do you call it, in the preliminary stages. And so I don't have much information of how far those are scored. But you can reach out to the colleagues at the Nuclear Power Ghana. Yeah, I think you can read them on LinkedIn or any of the platforms. They will be able to give you much information about the real activities which are going on in the project, the nuclear power project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I was there last week, but I will try and visit again to find out more about it. Thank you very much.
That's fine. Yeah, you're always welcome.
So, Pauline, you asked if I had some closing words, right?
Yeah, just like a summary, just something short.
Okay. Thank you so much. So, the topic is a very interesting topic, and it's not as in designed for just those that have background in nuclear and all that. When you're talking about nuclear security culture, it cuts across everybody, the public, those that work in the nuclear field, and every person. I would just encourage those online, the participants, to go. There are a lot of resources with regards this particular topic. For instance, the IE Nuclear Security Series document number 7, Nuclear Security Culture. It's a very interesting read, and there are also other supporting documents. But I just basically want to say that in that document, there's a part that states that history, tradition, and management practices kind of have a huge impact on nuclear security culture. What this just goes to say is that we already have inbuilt, as in based on our history, based on tradition, this is how we do it. I guess one of the speakers also mentioned that this is how we do it. So there could always be that reluctance, resistance towards doing something new. But what it actually acknowledges in the document that these have an impact on nuclear security culture. But what this whole program is designed for is to enable us to actually open our minds to know that the threats associated nuclear security threat is real. You really need to first of all acknowledge that and know that, because that is the foundation for even having for enhancing the nuclear security. So my appeal to everyone is to actually go in, do some in-depth study, and know that our culture shapes whatever we do. Roger mentioned about the willingness to be able to report a situation when it is actually noticed. Yes, sometimes it actually has to do with potential backlash when certain incidents are reported. So it's everyone has a role to play. The leaders, the individuals, the people lower down the ladder. Also, so the leader has to, as in, put in that, as in, to make everyone feel comfortable. Let me just put it as basic as that. To make everyone feel comfortable that yes, once a situation is reported that has nuclear security implication, it will be treated with the urgency that it deserves. So that is just the point I just want to make. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Osime. You took longer than expected. That's okay. So thank you to everyone, and do have a lovely day. Bye-bye.
Thank
The
you.
record of this presentation will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. Then I'm going to send it to the speakers. You need of it.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Have a good day.
Thank you
All right,
so
bye.
much.
All right.
Bye.